together to tell the Roswell legend in a series of sensational books. Postman turned UFO author Don Schmitt has been following the Roswell mystery for nearly 3 decades. His numerous books on the subject have made him one of the key champions of the legend. Schmitt's witnesses have convinced him that the government did recover a flying saucer back in 1947.
All of our witnesses are telling us it was the first press release. That was the correct one. They recovered the flying saucer.
Thanks to these accounts, the UFO community often cites Roswell as the best proof that extraterrestrials have been to Earth. But they face a wall of scientific disagreement.
Eyewitness accounts are completely unreliable. And we know this from a huge amount of research done in the 1990s following the false memory, recovered memory business of people recovering memories of things that happened decades before that in fact never happened.
The legend begins with why aliens noticed Earth in the 1940s.
What is the one specific intelligence signal that is still traveling out through our galaxy? And that's that first atomic bomb flash from June of 1945. And it still took them 2 years to get here. And they appeared to have arrived en masse to some degree in the summer of '47.
In fact, the first signals in space were a decade earlier, with the advent of radio and television.
I think they were here to scope out the activity here. You'd want to find out about the military.
You had White Sands Proving Ground, where they were doing all the V-2 rocket launches. Los Alamos, where they were still conducting atomic research. And then here in Roswell, where you had the first atomic bomb squadron, the 519th Bomb Group.
Other Roswell campaigners think that the aliens came here to save us.
Maybe they came to help. Roswell is less than 100 miles from where the atomic bomb was set off 2 years before the incident happened. Were they sitting out there wondering what are these clowns up to? Are they going to self-destruct?
Don Schmitt has interviewed military witnesses who recalled monitoring UFOs in New Mexico in June 1947.
We had talked to one of the radar operators up at Kirtland Army Airfield up in Albuquerque at that time, and admitted to us that they had tracked a number of unknowns throughout the state, a number of days leading up to the actual incident. It would only make sense that for all of the sightings at that time, that one would eventually crash.
On Independence Day 1947, the rancher who found the debris, Mac Brazel, recalled there being a violent electrical storm. And between the thunderclaps, he told friends, he might have heard some kind of explosion. The Roswell story tells that one of the alien spaceships was struck by lightning, causing major damage. Debris fell onto Mac Brazel's field before the stricken spaceship crashed into the ground 55 kilometers away.
So when did you say you found it?
I just drove out and it was all over the place like this.
Once the story reached the Roswell Army airfield, 2 intelligence officers were dispatched to evaluate and collect the debris. Major Jesse Marcel and plainclothes officer Captain Sheridan Cavett filled several sacks with the material. That night, Major Marcel took some of the debris home and showed it to his 11-year-old son, Jesse Jr.
And when I walked in, I thought, well, why are you waking me up just to look at some garbage here? And he says, no, I look at this carefully because this is not anything you'll ever see again. And he says, I think this is parts of what they call flying saucers.
In the meantime, they've also learned that there's another site much closer to town, also based on civilian testimony.
A now-dead witness, Jim Ragsdale, professed to have been with his girlfriend when he saw the spaceship crash 80 kilometers northwest of Roswell. In an affidavit, he told how the military quickly arrived and removed both the crashed alien spaceship and its dead crew.
North of town, they are loading onto a flatbed and loading into ambulance trucks the remains of a ship and crew.
According to Ragsdale's testimony, 4 extraterrestrial bodies were found in the wreckage. The aliens were said to be small, with large heads and huge eyes.
We have talked to witnesses who are first-hand witnesses, second, third, fourth-hand witnesses. Their stories pretty well collaborate. The description of the bodies that were found.
Frank Joyce remembers that Mac Brazel told him there were alien bodies at the first debris site.
The key question I asked him was, look, were there any passengers? He said, yes, there were little people. They were not human, and they were dead. In other words, he had some dead aliens out there.
If any of these reports were accurate, a crashed alien craft and its dead crew were now in the hands of the US military. Several witnesses claimed that the military then took the debris and bodies to Hangar 84 at Roswell's Army Airfield.
We've heard of military surrounding the hangar, the debris and bodies. Inside the hangar, guarded, military outside with weapons. I have interviewed a witness who claims to have seen a body in the hangar where the debris was taken prior to being shipped to Wright Field up in Ohio.
Wright-Patterson Airfield in Ohio is a top-secret military base used for examining enemy aircraft. Only second-hand testimony exists of alien materials being flown there, but it's become an accepted part of the Roswell legend. Back in Roswell, eyewitnesses like Jim Ragsdale testified that a huge recovery operation was underway.
50 to 60 troops are up at the debris field on hands and knees, shoulder to shoulder, picking up every last shard of that wreck.
Roswell defenders also claim that as part of the cover-up, the military ransacked media offices.
We have numerous accounts from the radio stations as well as the newspapers describing how military MPs went from office to office, confiscating, ransacking desks and file cabinets.
UFO promoters report that a number of witnesses, like rancher Mac Brazel, were threatened to keep the story quiet.
And when he's finally allowed to return home, he's sworn to secrecy. He was, by all accounts, a broken man. It's quite clear that the government resorted to very extreme measures in keeping this quiet.
The Roswell legend only came to life in the late 1970s, 30 years after the fact. But strangely, it follows almost the exact same storyline as a 1950s UFO hoax. Coincidence or not?
I'm going to give you some.
Orson Welles dramatized The War of the Worlds for a nationwide radio audience. Welles's performance was so convincing, it caused thousands to run into the streets, terrified that they were already under attack from robotic Martians.
The War of the Worlds phenomenon is no different in principle than any mass hysteria. This is how they work. An idea gets planted, it gets started in some form of medium communication, people hear it, and then they start talking about it, then the panic builds.
Ever since Welles's broadcast, the threat of alien visitors from outer space has been part of popular culture. But in 1945, a much greater threat came from the skies. The fear of nuclear war was suddenly very real.
The Cold War was upon us. We were deathly afraid of the Russians and hydrogen bombs and attacks of all sorts.
Then, to add to the public fear, in June 1947 there were hundreds of sightings of unidentified flying objects. What were they, and to whom did they belong? When the story of the recovered flying disc at Roswell got out, it seemed that at last the mystery of flying saucers might be solved. But almost immediately the story disappeared. Americans continued to search for answers elsewhere. Were these flying saucers Russian spy planes? Were they their own? Or were they from another world entirely? Hundreds of UFO movies, books, and comics played to the public's fascination.
Here we had flying saucers, aliens and spaceship playing on television and movies, and while they were frightening, they were entertainment that took us away from the real fear, which was the Russians.
Then in 1950, one non-fiction book offered proof that aliens were visiting us. Behind the Flying Saucers, written by Hollywood columnist Frank Scully, was a sensational account of a crashed UFO.
Frank Scully was a well-regarded author, and he wrote a book essentially about what two men had told him about this incident in Aztec, New Mexico.
Scully's two informants had revealed that, as in Roswell, a crashed flying saucer and dead aliens had been recovered in New Mexico in 1947.
There was some kind of a crash out on the highway. Bodies were retrieved and taken to a military base in northern New Mexico.
The story parallels Roswell in many ways. The alien craft was made from some kind of lightweight but indestructible metal. There was also a type of hieroglyphic writing present. The aliens were said to have been just a meter tall, with skinny, human-like bodies. And, like Roswell, the extraterrestrial evidence was hidden at a secret military base. But there was in fact no connection between the book and the Roswell incident. Frank Scully's 1950 publication was set in Aztec, New Mexico, nearly 650 kilometers from Roswell. And the Roswell story, which shadows so much of the Aztec book, wouldn't be told for another 30 years. Behind the Flying Saucers was a bestseller, and most people believed it to be true. Then in 1952, the two informers of the book, Silas Newton and Leo Gebauer, were convicted of fraud. Their Aztec story was a hoax.
Headline edition, 1947.
But reports of the scam had little impact. By then, the idea of extraterrestrial visitors in flying saucers had already captured the public's imagination.
The whole business of a flying saucer is classic myth-making from a single source saying they were skipping along like saucers on water. And from there, all science fiction authors, movie makers, they all say, okay, we have to construct a model that looks like, a saucer.
Science fiction was fast becoming science fact. Many of these 1950s sci-fi movies were set in the deserts of New Mexico, a hotbed of top-secret projects. These included nuclear bombs, V-2 rockets, experimental crafts, and other deadly weapons. All of these projects were shrouded in secrecy and intense security. When a V-2 rocket crashed in Alamogordo in New Mexico, it sparked a massive military operation.
We had a batch of GIs, basically shoulder to shoulder, marching down this valley where the crash occurred. Naturally, some people had picked up a few pieces of metal and said, I've got me a souvenir. The Army went door to door, so they recovered all the wreckage.
Such covert action eventually led to public suspicion, and science fiction began to paint the military as the bad guys. Then in the 1960s came the Vietnam War. It was the first war the Americans weren't likely to win. The huge loss of life and the clandestine nature of operations changed America's image of its government. Richard Nixon's disastrous administration only added to the nation's growing distrust. What else might the government be covering up? Anything seemed possible, even the existence of extraterrestrials. Against this backdrop of mistrust, conspiracy rumors flew that the military was hiding alien technology at secret bases.
Secret places like the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and especially Area 51 are like Rorschach inkblots on our imaginations to just see what it is we want to see that's in there, because you're not going to get in there. How can we check and find out? So that allows the imagination to just run amok.
UFO advocates fervently believe that the government is still hiding an alien craft and its dead crew.
Something did crash. Something was recovered. Whatever was recovered, the government still has it in its possession.
Sensational books and films have made bold claims of an incredible military cover-up. But demands on the government to make public any secrets on extraterrestrials have failed to uncover any relevant information. SETI is an independent scientific body that searches space for any signs of extraterrestrial intelligence.
The facts are that we haven't found the signal from space that would tell us that there's somebody out there.
Is it possible that ET could have known about Earth in the 1940s? Seth Shostak thinks the theory of aliens noticing atomic blasts in 1945 is implausible.
Well, that means they can't be more than 1 light year away, right? Because it would take a year for the signal, the light from those explosions to get to them, and they have to come back down here. They can't go faster than the speed of light. So 1 year out, 1 year back, that's 2 light years to get back here by 1947. There are no stars within 1 light year of the sun.
Whatever the truth about Roswell, the fact remains that from June 1947 onwards, there were UFO sightings all over America. 1 year later, the Pentagon responded with an investigation known as Project Blue Book to gather military and civilian testimony. In June that year, just 12 months after the Roswell incident, a Project Blue Book advisory committee met in secret to discuss its findings. Colonel Howard McCoy, Chief of Intelligence for the Army, confirmed at this meeting that the military had never recovered a flying saucer.
He then went on to make a statement that is devastating to the Roswell case. McCoy said, and I quote, "I can't even tell you how much we would give to have one of those crash in an area so that we could recover whatever they are."
If the alien story of Roswell were true, such a recovery would certainly have generated a huge military paper trail. But no compelling documentary evidence has ever emerged which supports the UFO claims. The only evidence comes from the many witness accounts.
This long list of witnesses is very curious because they didn't come out of the closet, so to speak, until the 1980s when Roswell became the Roswell incident, the mecca of ufology. And that tells us more about modern myth-making than it does about eyewitness accounts.
In 1989, claims that dead aliens had been found at the crash site caused quite a stir. But they'd only surfaced 40 years after the event. The first person to mention extraterrestrial bodies was retired mortician Glenn Dennis.
Glenn Dennis was a mortician at Ballard Funeral Home. He claims that he knew a nurse out at the base at the infirmary that was involved with taking notes while they were doing an examination on a body. And she had drawn a sketch of an alien face and hand and given it to Glenn.
Neither the nurse nor the original drawing has ever been found, casting doubt on the claim. Dennis redrew what he asserts the mystery nurse had shown him, but Seth Shostak wonders why the aliens look so humanoid.
It's unlikely that the aliens will look like us, but it's very handy if you're making a film or a TV series about aliens that they look something like us, because otherwise, how are you going to relate to them as a member of the audience?
Frank Joyce claims that rancher Mac Brazel told him there were alien bodies at the debris site.
I remember on the phone he told me he had some dead aliens out there.
But Major Jesse Marcel, who was keen to prove the debris was alien, never mentioned any bodies.
My dad never saw them, or if he did, he never mentioned it to me, but I think had he seen them, he would have certainly made it be known that, yeah, there were some people out there too.
Even the UFO community has mixed feelings about the claim of alien bodies.
The part about the Roswell incident involving bodies is extremely questionable, primarily because nothing was mentioned about them for many years, and the number of bodies varies depending who you talk to.
Dennis Balthaser acknowledges that the Roswell story is littered with unreliable witnesses.
Some witnesses have decided to elaborate on their stories. Some have outright lied. Some weren't involved at all, but have given the impression that they were.
The false testimony and many hoaxes in the Roswell legend are reminiscent of the 1950 novel Behind the Flying Saucers. The only concrete part of the Roswell legend is that some kind of debris was found in Mac Brazel's field in 1947. When Jesse Jr. saw the debris as an 11-year-old boy, his father was already convinced it was extraterrestrial.
He just said something like he thought this was parts of a flying saucer. Again, I wasn't quite sure what he meant by that.
Jesse Marcel is the only person alive today who's consistently claimed to have handled the material. His testimony is held up as key proof that the Roswell incident did involve extraterrestrials. But Dr. Michael Shermer argues that a young boy would be strongly influenced by his father's opinion.
An 11-year-old boy is going to be hugely influenced by his father under any conditions. But in this case, his father is a well-respected military officer. Of course, he's going to be influenced.
Even though he's an important witness, much of what Marcel describes sounds commonplace.
There's a lot of metal foil, kind of a thick aluminum wrap type of material, and there was some black plastic material looked like Bakelite at that time.
Legend has it that the metal foil had extraordinary qualities, but the young boy saw none.
I know that the foil was supposed to have been like metal with a memory where if you bend it, fold it, it would unfold. Well, I didn't see that.
Other key witnesses, including Mac Brazel, suggest the debris was quite ordinary. UFO advocates have refused to accept any of these statements, saying that the witnesses were either lying to maintain the cover-up or simply confused. In 1978, Jesse Marcel Sr. claimed that the material he'd collected on Mac Brazel's ranch had been switched with the debris from a weather balloon.
Major Marcel said until the day he died that what was on the floor was not what he brought in from Roswell, New Mexico.
To ufologists, this explains why the debris the public saw in press photos looked like a weather balloon, not a flying saucer. But amazing new testimony from Marcel's son suggests that the Major thought the debris the reporters saw had been part of an alien spaceship.
There's one curious element, though. My dad said that the reporter saw only a very small part of the real thing. So does that mean that in that mix-up of a balloon wreckage, was there parts of the real stuff in there?
Today, Jesse Marcel admits it's possible that the foil-like material in the photographs and what his father brought home could have been the same.
You know, the foil did not have the paper backing. Could have been confused with the foil that I saw.
But he remains convinced that there was one thing in the debris that could only have been extraterrestrial. He describes small metal-like I-beams with hieroglyphic symbols.
That metal beam, like a small miniaturized I-beam, and it had these purplish violet symbols on the inside edge of that. You know, my dad said something like, "This is alien writing."
While Marcel Jr. describes metal I-beams, his father remembered them as not being like metal, it looked more like wood. Such contradictions among eyewitnesses are widespread among the Roswell faithful. Other key witnesses also described very earthly debris items such as wooden sticks, tin foil, a tough paper, and rubber strips. And both scientists and skeptics find it hard to believe that an alien spaceship would be constructed from such simple materials.
If you're going to go from one star system to another, you need a craft that can go a fair fraction of the speed of light. it has to go tens, maybe 100,000 miles a second. Well, a craft like that is going to have enormous engines. It's going to be something that's going to, probably be the size of an ocean liner. This is not going to be a little, souped-up motorbike.
But while the physical abilities of this material remain in question, almost all the key witnesses made reference to seeing unusual markings. Jesse Marcel described seeing alien hieroglyphs on small metal I-beams.
I have to believe this was something from another civilization. I'm absolutely convinced of that.
The Marcels both think they saw alien writing. But other witnesses testified to seeing nothing more than flowered patterns. If the origin of these markings can be identified, it might solve the Roswell mystery once and for all.
It's about time people knew that something strange went on out there that night.
In 1978, when Jesse Marcel recalled events from 30 years earlier, he unwittingly kick-started the Roswell legend. Ever since, UFO authors have expanded the story to mythic proportions. The Roswell legend makers can't agree on many key details. Where the spaceship crashed, who actually saw it, and how many bodies were recovered changes from book to book. But the Army's counter-story that the debris was from a weather balloon was also in question. Back in 1947, Mac Brazel reported that he'd seen weather balloon debris before, and what he'd found this time was different. Throughout the 1980s, suspicion of a cover-up fueled the Roswell legend. Then in the early 90s, two UFO researchers, Carl Flock and Robert Todd, unearthed a top-secret mission that had long been forgotten. And it offered a much simpler and very terrestrial solution to the Roswell mystery. Back in 1945, America exploded the first atomic bomb. It was then only a matter of time before the Soviets would develop their own nuclear program. In 1947, testing began on a secret spying program called Project Mogul. This highly classified mission was set up to listen out for any Soviet atomic tests.
Mogul was so classified, we didn't know what the classification was.
In fact, Mogul was classified as 1A, the same as the H-bomb program. Project Mogul would use around 50 large rubber balloons, which would carry listening devices called transponders into the higher atmosphere. Up here, sound moved much more quickly, and a nuclear explosion could, in theory, be detected, even on the other side of the world.
I know it worked because I saw a beautiful signal come in one day from the Pacific, and it was an American nuclear bomb explosion, and I was tracking it right here in New Mexico.
In 1947, B.D. Gildenberg was a young engineering undergraduate at New York University when the military commissioned his department to work on Project Mogul. The Mogul team began to gather the materials needed. They farmed out the making of some kite-like radar reflectors called Raywin targets to a Brooklyn toy manufacturer. These would be used to track the balloon's movements, and the team needed hundreds of them. They were essentially six-pronged kites, each a balsa wood frame covered with silver foil and backed with a strong white material. In June 1947, the NYU team traveled with all its equipment to the White Sands testing range in New Mexico. From this remote desert location, it began experimental launches of its new top-secret mission.
This was the first time that constant level balloons were used in the United States, which we were still learning about and still experimenting with.
On the 4th of June, test flight number 4 was launched in mid-afternoon. But due to cloud cover, the Mogul team soon lost it on both radar and spotter plane as it drifted northeast towards Roswell. The free trailing device was around 180 meters long. With up to 50 large balloons, 9 shiny Raywin targets, ballast controls and transponders, the contraption would have borne little resemblance to a weather balloon. Eventually, the neoprene rubber balloons disintegrated, showering the desert below. Although the mission was top secret, the equipment itself was of little value, and the Mogul team deemed its recovery low priority. Brazel's description of the debris being of rubber, silver foil, and balsa wood, and that there was lots of it, matches Project Mogul perfectly. The photographs of the debris clearly show similar items. But Jesse Marcel Jr. still believes that the hieroglyphs he saw 60 years ago were not from this planet.
The I-beams were apart from everything. This was something from another civilization.
There was no obvious explanation as to why any part of Project Mogul would contain strange hieroglyphic symbols. But a closer inspection of the design drawings for the radar reflectors offers a vital clue. The paper-backed foil needed to be secured to the balsa frame with both glue and adhesive tape. The toy company in Brooklyn commissioned to make the Raywin targets used what it had to hand. And that included some decorative children's tape with flowered patterns set in a purple dye. After a few days in the desert sun, the tape would have peeled off and blown into the desert. But in the heat, the purple dye impregnated the wood, leaving flowered patterns on the balsa wood frame.
Some of the tape had these inscriptions from the Brooklyn toy department on it. And that's where the hieroglyphics came from. And it was really nothing very exotic.
Science now sees Roswell as little more than myth-making.
We have a really good understanding now of the psychology and sociology of myth-making. How an idea gets started, it's based on some factual event, sure, but then it just starts to build and the story gets retold and memories are not reliable, they're filtered, and before you know it, things get completely different.
Today, Project Mogul is accepted among most scientists as the rational answer to the Roswell mystery. And new testimony suggests that Project Mogul and its successors may in fact have been responsible for the entire UFO phenomenon. From June 1947 onwards, hundreds of top-secret high-altitude balloons were launched all over America. And both the balloons and their payloads became ever more bizarre. B.D. Gildenberg believes that these balloons were what many people mistook for alien craft.
I remember the CIA being at some of our launches, and they were the ones who were pushing this. Said, yeah, let these remain UFO reports as a cover-up for all these secret programs that were coming on board.
But if Roswell really is nothing more than a myth, why have a quarter of all Americans been taken in by it?
We do tend to believe things that are kind of titillating, exciting. The idea that there's beings around, maybe they're even here now, just in orbit with stealth technology, and they're watching us, they're taking care of us. All that is very compelling. But when we actually go and check, and it turns out not to be true, then it's time to move on to something else.
What we now know about Roswell is that Mac Brazel did discover debris in his field. And just as he reported, it wasn't a weather balloon. The government did cover up the truth. Project Mogul was a Category 1A top-secret spy mission, crucial to national security. It did cause confusion and excitement because no one outside Project Mogul had seen that configuration of a balloon device before. The local army probably did overreact. as it had no idea how sensitive the project or the material was. Wright-Patterson Airfield still remains a top-secret military base responsible for examining strange craft. But foreign planes, not alien ones. UFO spokespeople have already dismissed Project Mogul as just another government smokescreen. They remain convinced that somewhere, under lock and key, there's a secret X-file that outlines an incredible story. One in which alien spaceships traveled through the galaxy to save humanity, only to crash in the desert outside Roswell. They refuse to accept that Mac Brazel stumbled across nothing more than the disintegrating debris of a top-secret military project, partially stuck together by child's tape. Perhaps the real Roswell mystery is why so many have been taken in for so long by nothing more than a footnote in history.